Hi, I'm Jim DeCola, Master Luthier for Gibson Guitars. Welcome to Gibson's Guide to Guitar Setup and Maintenance. In this episode, we're going to talk about fret buzz and the causes of fret buzz. That's when your strings aren't ringing as clean and true as they should be. This is kind of a wide-ranging subject, and it can happen from numerous issues. It could be setup related, such as a bridge that's too high or low, or a neck that is underbowed or backbowed, or maybe just a loose bridge saddle. And then it can also be from frets that are worn and maybe low in spots, or maybe a fret that has worked itself loose, maybe with the wood expanding and contracting causes a fret to work loose and pop up. So knowing how to troubleshoot and narrow down the source of that fret buzz can help you determine if you can fix it yourself or if you need to take it to a qualified repair person. First, we're going to talk about setup related issues. Most common, you're going to have a neck in an underbow or a backbow situation. We touched off on this on the episode about adjusting your neck, but to reiterate, if it's in spring, oftentimes with windows open and just more moisture because of spring rains and such, the humidity can cause the neck to swell. So that will cause the neck to backbow in that fashion. And when it's in a backbow situation, it'll typically buzz in your open fret, open or first fret positions, right? Now, if it's underbowed, this end of the neck will lean forward, it'll dip in the center, and then it'll rise where it joins the body. Then, being that the center of the neck is the low point of the neck, it will start buzzing as you get into the higher fret areas. So both will sound different or sound the same, but they're different ends of the neck. So you just know if you're playing open chords and it's buzzy there, you want to check for that backbow situation. So to do that, you would lay your guitar down. You could do it in your playing position, but here I'm going to lay the guitar down and remove the truss rod. And to illustrate that, I'm going to purposely tighten that neck to put it in a backbow situation. So now I'll take my adjustment wrench and I'll give it about a half of a turn. And I'll use the string as a straight edge, and I can see that it's touching, and there's no relief. Relief is that minute underbow curvature that you want for clean action. Now I don't have any relief, and I'm going to check it at this end. I may give it just a little bit more, just to make sure it's very apparent. So that's about one full turn. You can hear in all those positions, especially there. Now if you play here, it'll be a lot cleaner because that's not affected. This is all clean up here. So if it's buzzing in that open fret to the first, open chord positions, that's backbow. So if it's buzzing there, generally it's going to be a neck adjustment issue. So you can loosen your truss rod, the reverse of what I just did, and refer back to that other episode on adjusting your truss rod and adjust it accordingly with the right amount of relief. Now the next scenario I'll show you is if it's an underbow situation. So I'll go ahead now and loosen that truss rod. I'm going to give it a few turns. So it's pretty much loose and slack. Now, I'll check it by holding the strings down, and I can see there's way too much underbow, which is underbowed in that direction. So in this scenario, it'll buzz towards this end of the neck. As you get higher, it's ramping up like that, and then the frets will want to buzz on the fret in front of it. So you can hear how it's snappy like that. It's not ringing clean. Now you bend up and it's kind of choking. So in that scenario, then you would go ahead and adjust your neck as we showed in the previous video. Another scenario you may come across, if you verify that your neck is adjusted properly, no underbow, no backbow, it may still buzz in the open positions. then that's, indicative of a nut that's too high or too low. So the easiest way, and I'm going to lay the guitar down, I generally like to test it in a playing position by pressing the strings down at the 3rd fret and then pressing each of the strings down lightly to ensure that there's just a little what I call bounce, a little gap between that 1st fret and the bottom of each string. There should be just a little gap there. If there's not, and that string is touching that 1st fret, then most likely that nut is too low. And you'll know that when you hit an open string, it'll buzz out. So if the nut's too low, that's very apparent. Sometimes, this is a tricky one, a lot of people have difficulty understanding. If the nut is excessively too high, what can happen is when you play an open note, it's clean. But when you fret a note in the first couple positions, that string is leaving the nut and hitting that fret like that. So it's very hard to get a clean note because that string is wanting to pull itself up because of that severe angle. So sometimes if you have a buzz in the 1st fret position and you know that your neck is adjusted properly and that there's no low frets or high frets, that can be because the nut is too high. So buzz can come from there also. Another nut-related issue is if your nut isn't filed properly. So as the strings leave the nut and go back to the tuners, there should be a downward angle. And on a Gibson headstock with a tilt-back headstock, you want the front of that nut to be what's called the witness point, where that string leaves the nut. That needs to be the highest point of that nut. If the nut is filed or it's worn down to where the string doesn't leave that slot on that front edge, it can sometimes buzz inside that nut. And so there, if the height is okay, oftentimes you can just back notch it, just file it at the appropriate angle. So I'll use this little straight edge to kind of show you. You hold your file at an angle to ensure that the string leaves from that front edge of the nut. So a lot of times that will remedy the situation. Another scenario is if your string slots are too wide. If it was filed or worn and the string is too wide, sometimes it will rattle back and forth inside that slot. It may have a back notch, but if it's too wide for that string, that can oftentimes cause a rattle too. So there you would use the appropriate size file to very gently deepen that slot so the string sits securely in the nut slot. And that's pretty much most of the nut-related buzz issues there. On the opposite end, in the bridge, you can have a lot of similar situations too. If the bridge isn't back notched, the string can oftentimes buzz on itself, on the saddle. And a lot of times what happens is you adjust that neck and you think the neck is adjusted properly, which it is, or you may think you have a high fret, but if it follows all the way up the neck, then that's going to tell you that it's generally a saddle that's been filed without a proper back notch, or maybe it's too wide. And if it's too wide, and especially on plain strings, because they're so fine, to get a saddle slot sharp enough, sometimes you might not have a file. But here's a MacGyver trick you can use. You can use an X-Acto knife or a similar razor knife. And a lot of times you can pull, especially if a high E or one of the plain strings, if you don't have the appropriate file, you can use that razor knife and hold it at that back angle and just give it a few passes. And oftentimes that razor will be able to kind of etch the bottom of the slot secure enough to hold that string and prevent it from buzzing. So that's a quick and easy way. And things can't really go wrong there because a razor knife isn't going to cut through the saddle like a file would. So you can feel pretty confident, going after that. So you just remember to back notch it so the string will ultimately leave off the front of that saddle, and then give it a few passes through there just to kind of establish the bottom of that slot. And that's a very helpful fix that will take care of that. Another scenario that can contribute to fret buzz is your pickup height adjustment. Sounds simple, but actually what can happen is if your pickups are too high, you may get your output that you're going after, but as you play up, the neck and your strings go across that pickup, they're going to touch a pole piece, and they can often buzz on the pickup itself. So again, refer to the episode where I explain how to properly adjust your pickups and don't get them too high. Another pickup related issue is if you have a rod magnet pickup. We make some P90s that have 6 individual rod magnets, or maybe some other single coils that have individual rod magnets. That direct magnet pull is a lot stronger direct pull than the bar magnets and screws that we have in most of our Gibson pickups. So those pickups are a little more susceptible to fret buzz or just a buzz itself than a humbucking pickup would be. So what happens there is, because that magnetic pull is so strong, it's actually pulling down on that string, and it'll sound as if it has fret buzz, but that's because that magnet's pulling down on the string. It will cause it to actually buzz on the frets and have that out of tune, buzzy kind of sound. So those pickups you will typically adjust 1 to 2/64ths lower than you would adjust a conventional humbucker. So that's another pickup related adjustment. So the last scenario that can happen is, a lot of times the most obvious or the first suspected, a high fret or a low fret, uneven frets. Frets are softer metal than the steel strings. Typically frets are nickel, silver, which is an alloy that's softer than the steel of frets. So through normal playing wear, over time, generally years, the frets will develop little kind of soft notches where the strings go. And if that happens, that will start to cause fret buzz. Sometimes the string is buzzing off the fret itself as it wears. It doesn't have a nice articulate rounded crown to it. It can buzz off itself, or you may play in a certain area more often than other areas, and that will naturally wear. And in a way, it's kind of like having a neck adjustment issue, because now you have a low spot, but it's over several frets. And then you can also have just one low fret. Maybe you set your guitar against something and it took an impact and knocked that fret down a little bit low. Or you could have a scenario where a fret just worked loose. Maybe the wood moved, such as the fret slot was too loose and the fret just sprung up or popped loose. So to track down those sort of issues, I would recommend laying the guitar down. Make sure it's 2-pitch, and then adjust the neck with your truss rod wrench so it's perfectly flat. At this point, to verify your fret levelness, you want to do that with a perfectly flattened, adjusted neck. And with string, you can do this with string tension, and actually that's kind of preferred. So if you do it with string tension, that's taking into account what the strings are doing to that neck. Adjust it straight, take your straight edge, and this is courtesy of Stuart McDonald's Guitar Supply. So they make great guitar supply tools. And you're going to move the strings back so you can see under there, and look for any low spots or high spots. A high spot is very easy, because if it's a high fret, the straight edge will rock on that high fret. So if you have, say, at the 12th fret, maybe that worked loose and it sprung up. When you put that straight edge on, it's going to rock like that. And maybe it only does it in one part of the fret, maybe just one side lifted up. So you can verify that, move it. I generally will check it on each side of the neck and then in the center of the neck. So once you verify that, you can isolate that fret or multiple frets that worked loose and then determine the best method to go after that. If it's a low fret, that's a little bit trickier. So you'll want to look under the straight edge like I described, and again, on both sides of the neck in the center, and work your way from fret to fret. And it's nice if you can have a light on the other side of that straight edge so you can see that light shining through if it is low. So once you find that, you can isolate that low fret and then again plan the best course of action. Another handy tool is a small straight edge, and that's good for inspecting. If you really think it's in a certain area, the small straight edge is handy. It's just less cumbersome and it allows you to kind of focus on that little area. But either way, A good quality straight edge will help you identify whether you have worn areas into the frets themselves or if you have a high or a low fret. Once you've gone through all the adjustment scenarios to troubleshoot and verify the source of the fret buzz, and you arrive at the point where you really feel that it's a high fret or a low fret or worn fret areas where it actually has to have fret work, I would recommend taking it to a qualified repair shop. That's beyond the scope of the average player, and if you don't really know what you're doing, it's best to take it to a qualified shop because they have the tools and the knowledge to properly handle that. So to sum it all up, things to consider besides the scenarios we covered with the neck adjustment, the bridge and saddle adjustments are your playing style. We've touched off on that in other episodes. So again, if you're a player who has a very light touch, you can get away with a lot lower action and a neck that's a lot straighter than average and have a very clean action without fret buzz. If you're a player who's on the opposite end of the spectrum, you may have a very dynamic and heavy-handed approach. And again, there's no right or wrong there. It's just your personal preference. There, you just have to understand you have to have a bit higher action and a little bit more relief to accommodate that heavier technique. So if you're the player who's in the average or middle range, that's generally who we cater to in terms of our factory specs. And those are designed for those players where you can play a little bit heavier or a little bit lighter and it's still comfortable either way. And just knowing your style and how it applies to your instrument and how those adjustments coincide with your style will provide a lot greater insight into what you can expect from your instrument and how it needs to be adjusted. Thanks for watching, and be sure to tune in and catch the next episode of Gibson's Guide to Guitar Setup and Maintenance.